Questions and research designs. Dear students, we are required to select a research design through which we can the best address our research questions. And there is a tip that we must be making sure that there is no extraneous factor that would contaminate our data. So in this session, we are going to discuss about the extraneous factors which are to be avoided and which could potentially contaminate our data. There are so many extraneous factors possible to influence our data. And if extraneous factors are influencing our research data, then the internal and the external validity would be influenced, and we won't be claiming, we won't be able to claim that our data is accurate and it is to the point. Okay? So we are required to make sure that our data is not only internally but it is externally valid, right? So research is like a minefield, and we must be, very carefully, very strategically going, and we must be planning in a way where we could avoid extraneous factors. So that's an important, requirement from research, that we must be making sure that the extraneous factors are controlled and they are not influencing our data, right? So extraneous factors may contaminate our data, and once they contaminate the data, then our results are influenced and we may not be having accurate results, right? So we must be carefully making sure that our data is pure and it is not affected, right? If there is an effect or influence of the extraneous factors, then we may be losing internal as well as external data, validity of the study. And internal, when we would claim that our dependent variable is only influenced by our independent variable, and then the external validity is that we would be in a position to generalize. So that is more relevant to generalizability, right? So our data must be not only internally valid. It very simply means that our dependent variable is influenced only by the independent variable, and there are no extraneous variables or not any confounding variable which is going to affect our dependent variable, right? We must be controlling others sort of variables, okay? And the external validity is related to the generalizability. So whatever we find ultimately should be generalizable to the whole population group, right? So what are those external factors and internal factors which could ultimately influence our data? And we must also make sure that not only our data is internally but externally valid, because internal and external validity are mutually exclusive. They are not actually exclusive, because when our dependent variable is showing changes and variation, it should be only because of the independent variable, right? And when this connection is there and it is made sure that the dependent variable is only influenced by the independent variable, then we must also be making sure that it should be generalizable, so that the whole group is taken into account and it is transferable to the whole group. So what are those extraneous factors? Let me just show you by this figure. In this figure you would see that how it is carefully required for a researcher to make sure that there is no contamination involved and there is not any extraneous factor allowed to contaminate the data, right? So this is the figure. Let me take you to the figure. In this figure you could see that the independent variable, which is on the top left corner, it is working, and the influence is shown here in the line of dotted line, and it is going through the dependent variable, right? So the dependent variable is influenced by the independent variable, but this is not an easy task. It's very carefully it is to be very carefully planned, because there are so many mines shown in this figure, and these mines are actually the extraneous factors. Like there is history, so the history may be contaminating your data, history and maturation of the sample, and Pygmalion effect when a researcher is like in love with the the study and the research design. Similarly, Hawthorne effect, novelty disruption, when there is a study for the first time, so the novelty may be disrupting the results. Similarly, there are some other minds like treatment fidelity, treatment strength, time, and control group contamination, when the control group knows that it is the control group and they are aware of the treatment given to the experimental group, so they may be contaminating the data. And there are some other possibilities like statistical regression, when the statistics are not properly taken, and then the differential selection when the randomization is not involved. Similarly, subject attrition, if some of the subjects are dropping, then they would also affect the influence of independent variable on the dependent variable. There are accumulative treatment factors, or maybe the testing factors are there, when the experimental effect might be there. So all these extraneous factors, they are to be avoided if you want to make it a valid study internally and externally. So it is an important requirement from the researcher that whatever is taking place as a change in the dependent variable is only and only due to the influence of independent variable. And in order to make this sure, we as researchers are required to avoid all the rest of these factors.